Strangely, there are some people who are convinced that the Apostle Paul was a deceiver who single-handedly kidnapped and ruined the Christian revelation that Jesus came to the earth to establish. They refuse to accept Paul's insistence that Christians are justified by faith. They despise the book of Romans, which hammers this theme home again and again. In fact, they just don't like any of Paul's epistles, and they consider him the destroyer of genuine Christianity, the Christianity Jesus came to establish. These follow Jesus but ignore Paul folks believe that Jesus came to bring us a set of commands and standards to follow. He told us to love our neighbors, to love God with all of our hearts, to forgive those who sin against us, to turn the other cheek, to pray secretly to our Father in heaven, and so forth, which of course he did. They insist it's our job to read Jesus' words and keep his commands with no need for this business of being justified by faith. This is what they believe is genuine Christianity. These people practically hate Paul. Paul's insistence that we're saved by faith, justified by faith, we're acceptable in God's eyes through faith in Jesus, well, they think that's just horrendous. They suggest Paul was deluded, maniacal, and just plain wrong. He applied a bogus concept of justification by faith over top of the life of Jesus, something they are confident that Jesus never sanctioned, approved, or suggested. These love Jesus but hate Paul folks will point to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's little said by Jesus about saving faith in these Gospels. Mostly, when you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you're reading of Jesus' miracles and his demands for godly living, and that fits with their narrative perfectly. You see, they say, Jesus never suggested that we're saved by faith. He came and told us how to live and how to please God. But then there is that troubling Gospel of John. In this book, there are all kinds of direct statements, both by John and Jesus himself, that we are saved through faith. And when you pick up the Gospel of John, you don't have to read very long before finding these kind of verses. In fact, in the very first chapter, John writes this, "But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name." Some of the love Jesus, hate Paul folks would argue, yeah, but those are John's words. They're not Jesus' words, so they don't count. Well, it's true, those are indeed John's words, but this does prove one thing. It demonstrates it was not Paul alone who strongly believed that we're saved through faith in Jesus. The Apostle John undoubtedly believed this as well. So if you're going to discount Paul as being a fanatic and throw out all his books and deny his teachings, you'll have to do the same with John. And you're getting on some pretty shaky ground in doing that. You're saying Paul was worthless, you can't trust him. John was useless, you can't trust him either. Really? And you, little fella, we can trust you that we should ignore John and Paul? You're taking a lot on yourself, my friend. But it's not just John and Paul who preached salvation through faith in Jesus. As we read in the Gospel of John, we find all kinds of faith statements from the lips of Jesus Christ himself. Jesus told Nicodemus, "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life." When Jesus was asked what people should do to be able to perform miracles, Jesus replied, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he sent." And later in that same chapter, Jesus declares, "And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life." And at the tomb of Lazarus, just before raising him from the dead, Jesus told Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live." Jesus preached faith. The Gospel of John is saturated with faith statements like these. This absolutely demolishes the argument that the concept of being saved by faith, justified by faith, receiving eternal life through faith in Jesus is a Pauline invention. And yet the proponents of the love Jesus, hate Paul theology still insist that since Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't include much about faith for salvation, it must mean that Paul's ideas were heretical, and Paul was the great spoiler of the Christian religion. But how do they explain John? Well, they really cannot. And so if you press them very hard about the Gospel of John and bring up all those statements about faith that are sprinkled liberally throughout John's Gospel, they'll tell you John's Gospel was not really legitimate, at least many will. It doesn't even belong in the Bible according to them. They want us to read Matthew, Mark, and Luke and ignore John and ignore Paul. They essentially demolish the Holy Scriptures in a vain and foolish attempt to prove their erroneous assumption that salvation is attained simply by being good little boys and girls, and it has nothing to do with faith in Jesus. Well, I will acknowledge John's Gospel is indeed unique. Most of the stories and teachings of Jesus that are described in this account cannot be found in those first three Gospels. But that doesn't make it unreliable or false. John, in his old age, appears to have written stories and incidents about Jesus and shared teachings of Jesus that were not included in those previous accounts, in order to give a more complete picture of exactly who Jesus is and what he said and did. Just because John's Gospel is unique, that doesn't make it spurious. Many books in the Bible are unique. Ecclesiastes is unique. The book of Job is unique. The book of Psalms is unique. The book of Revelation is unique. And there are numerous others I could mention. And as for Paul being the spoiler of Christianity, we should keep in mind how Paul got his start in Christian ministry. Jesus Christ himself made a personal appearance to Paul as he traveled to Damascus to arrest Christians. It was Jesus who commissioned him as his apostle to the Gentiles. Did Jesus make a mistake? As Paul went around planting churches, winning souls, and teaching that we're saved by faith in Jesus? Did Jesus say up in heaven, "Oops, I sure never intended this. Paul is just ruining the church. I wish I had never even appeared to him"? Well, of course, Paul's ministry was not a mistake. Jesus knew what he was doing when he appeared to Paul on the road to Damascus. Salvation by grace through faith was not an invention of Paul. It was and is the only means by which men and women can be saved and can live forever in heaven as children of God. The work of God, says Jesus, the first and most important work God has established for all people everywhere is to believe in Him whom He sent. I want to encourage you to join Benedict and me in our home through our new podcast, Discover the Word with Den and Ben. While you drive in your car or while you walk or exercise at the gym, you can be learning the Bible through our low-key, user-friendly Bible studies. To get the information you need to listen to our Discover the Word with Den and Ben podcast, click on the link in the description.